There's a quiet truth about children who grow up ignored. They often become adults who struggle to believe they deserve attention at all. They walk into rooms and feel like they must shrink. They enter relationships and wonder if they're too much. They succeed at something, but instead of celebrating, they wait for it to be overlooked, as if invisibility is their natural state. This isn't because they lack talent or worth, but because the foundation of their sense of self was built in silence. Psychologists call this an internalized neglect schema. It means the brain learns to expect neglect, to anticipate dismissal, to assume that needs are a burden. A child who is ignored enough times eventually learns not to ask. They convince themselves that wanting love or understanding is wrong. Have you ever seen a child standing quietly in a crowded room, tugging gently at their parent's sleeve, waiting for even the smallest glance? Maybe you've seen it at a playground, in a classroom, or maybe you remember being that child yourself. The one who doesn't cry the loudest, who doesn't demand attention, who simply retreats into silence. On the surface, nothing dramatic seems to happen. But inside that child's mind, something profound unfolds. Because for a child, being ignored isn't just an inconvenience. It's a fracture in their sense of self. Childhood neglect doesn't always look like abuse. It doesn't always come with shouting or violence. Sometimes it's simply absence. The unanswered question, the lack of eye contact, the forgotten birthday, the parent too tired, too distracted, too busy to notice. The psychology of the ignored child runs deep. It shapes how they see themselves, how they interpret the world, and how they build relationships for the rest of their lives. We often say children are resilient, and yes, they adapt. But adaptation is not the same as healing. When a child learns to live without acknowledgement, they adapt by shrinking themselves, by hiding their needs, by convincing themselves they don't matter as much as others. And while that adaptation helps them survive childhood, it quietly haunts their adulthood in ways they may not even recognize. From a psychological perspective, acknowledgement isn't just about feeling good, it's about survival. Research in developmental psychology shows that children need 3 essential things to thrive: safety, stimulation, and connection. If one of these is missing, development suffers. But connection, the feeling of being seen, heard, and valued, is what shapes identity most directly. John Bowlby, the founder of attachment theory, said that secure attachment, formed when a caregiver consistently responds to a child's needs, builds a foundation of trust. That trust becomes the blueprint for future relationships. But when a child is ignored, when their emotional needs are met with silence or inconsistency, they internalize a dangerous belief. Maybe I don't deserve love. Maybe I'm not important. This isn't an exaggeration. Neuroscience shows that when a child's attempts at connection are ignored repeatedly, the brain interprets it as a threat. The stress response activates. Cortisol floods the body. Over time, their nervous system rewires itself to expect rejection. Anxiety becomes their baseline. Emotional regulation becomes fragile. And from the outside, they just look like a quiet kid. When a child is mistreated, the harm is visible. But when a child is ignored, the damage hides in plain sight. A child might stop asking questions because no one answers. They might stop showing excitement because no one responds. Over time, they begin to disappear, not physically, but emotionally. Psychologists call this emotional neglect. Unlike physical neglect, which leaves scars you can see, emotional neglect leaves scars hidden beneath the surface. These wounds don't appear right away. They surface years later when the ignored child tries to love, to connect, to build something, and runs into the quiet pain of their past. Adults who grew up ignored often struggle silently. They hesitate to share their thoughts, believing nobody really cares. They fear rejection so deeply that they avoid closeness altogether. Or they go to the opposite extreme, desperately chasing approval, bending over backward to keep others happy. Because deep down, they're still trying to earn the acknowledgement they missed as children. Imagine being 8 years old and running home from school with a drawing you're proud of. You hold it up to show your parent, but they're busy on the phone. You try again at dinner, but the moment passes. Eventually, you put the drawing away and never mention it again. Now imagine that happening not once, but hundreds of times. The child learns that joy, pride, and excitement are things best kept to themselves. Years later, that same person struggles to celebrate their own successes. The ignored child becomes the adult who ignores themselves. A 2019 study in the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry found that emotional neglect in childhood is strongly linked to chronic loneliness in adulthood, regardless of social environment. Even if that adult has friends or family, a quiet emptiness lingers inside. Most parents who ignore their children don't do so out of cruelty. Often, it's the result of exhaustion, stress, or simply not understanding how important acknowledgement is. A parent working long hours may have no emotional energy left. A parent with depression may struggle to notice their child's bids for attention. And in today's world of constant digital distraction, it's easier than ever to be physically present but emotionally absent. But to the child, the absence feels the same no matter the reason. That's why understanding the psychology of the ignored child matters, because awareness is the first step to breaking the cycle. Ignored children often develop coping mechanisms that, on the surface, look like strengths. Some become fiercely independent, taking care of themselves early. Others become overachievers, trying to earn the acknowledgement they crave. Some become peacekeepers, avoiding conflict to hold on to fragile connections. But beneath these strengths is exhaustion. The independent child grows into an adult who struggles to trust others. The high achiever becomes the perfectionist, never satisfied. The peacekeeper becomes the people pleaser, unable to say no. And perhaps the most heartbreaking transformation is the child who stops trying altogether, the one who concludes, if no one cares anyway, why bother? Ignored children rarely talk about what happened, because how do you explain what it feels like to be invisible? There's no dramatic story to tell, no scars to show, just silence. Just memories of moments that should have mattered but didn't. And that silence becomes its own prison. Adults who were ignored as children often hesitate to seek help, fearing they'll be dismissed again. They say things like, "Nothing really bad happened to me." But the absence of something essential is itself a trauma. It's like growing up in a house without air. You might survive, but you never truly breathe. They don't tell you this, but some of the most emotionally intelligent people you'll ever meet once had to grow up too fast. Sometimes they'll meet someone who sees through their calm, someone who notices the hesitation before they say, "I am okay." And in that moment, something shifts. Because for the first time, they don't have to explain the weight they've been carrying. They don't have to pretend. It's strange at first, letting someone care for them, letting themselves be soft after years of being strong. But that's where real healing begins. Not in fixing the past, but in finally believing that they are worthy of peace. That they deserve love that doesn't need performance. That being cared for isn't weakness. It's what they always needed. They were the children who learned to calm others before they ever learned to calm themselves. The ones who could read a room better than they could read a storybook. They became experts in peacekeeping, in silence, in making others comfortable, because comfort for them was a luxury. Years later, they appear composed, kind, self-aware. But behind that calm exterior is someone who still struggles to let others take care of them. Someone who flinches at chaos because it reminds them of home. Someone who feels guilty resting because they were taught that love must be earned through effort, and maybe that's their quiet tragedy. They grew wise before they ever got to be young. You can always recognize them, the ones who say it's fine, a little too quickly, smile a little too often, and apologize for things that aren't their fault. They don't want to be a burden. They've spent their whole lives making sure no one else ever feels burdened. But deep down, they crave what they never had. To be understood without explaining, to be loved without earning it, to finally feel safe enough to fall apart. They've built their lives around stability, yet part of them still waits for the next storm. Because when you grow up holding everything together, peace can feel unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. Healing for them isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's learning to exhale without fear. It's learning that they no longer need to save everyone to deserve love. And slowly, they start to change. They begin to set boundaries, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. They say no without guilt. They rest without apology. They stop chasing the kind of love that only exists when they're useful. It's quiet growth, invisible to most. But inside, it's revolutionary. Because for someone who's lived their whole life in survival mode, choosing peace is the loudest rebellion of all. They're no longer defined by what they had to endure. They're defined by what they've become: gentle, resilient, and finally free. And in that freedom, they rediscover parts of themselves that were buried long ago. The laughter that once felt too risky starts to return. The curiosity that was silenced by responsibility begins to bloom again. They start doing things not because they have to, but because they want to. They realize that not every silence means danger, not every raised voice means conflict, and not every mistake means punishment. They start to trust the world again, one small moment at a time. They learn that love isn't supposed to drain you. It's supposed to fill you. That being cared for doesn't mean you are weak. It means you are human. And for the first time, they let someone hold their heart without fear it will break. Because the truth is, those who grew up too fast never truly lost their innocence. It was only hidden, waiting for safety to bring it back. And when that safety finally arrives, it doesn't look like perfection. It looks like peace, quiet mornings, honest conversations, a life where they no longer have to perform to be worthy. They finally understand they were never too sensitive, never too emotional, never too much. They were just surviving. And now, they're finally living.